Morning, pre-Q geographers. Today we are moving on from looking at the land use models of Burgess and Hoyt to actually look at the development of industrialised cities in the late 1700s to early 1800s. So when I say pre-industrial revolution, I mean before sort of 1780. Okay, and before that, cities and settlements were very much centred around a focal point. And like a marketplace, a place to trade. When the Industrial Revolution came along, and what I mean by that is when cities started to, people started to, and society started to develop ways of creating products in a large scale, so widespread production of products in factories. When that happened in cities started to expand more. Here you see the factories in the orange squares. They were then centered around the main focal point of the city, very close to the main focal point of the city for trade and the use of people being in those areas. But with the development of factories also came, where the blue bars are, the development of what we called terraced houses. Very small houses side by side for where the workers of the factories, who are usually low-income people, would work. They would want to live very close to where they worked because they didn't have money for transport or they didn't have options for transport. The owners of the factories lived further away from town because they had the option to then travel in and had the money to then travel in. So this is a bit of a look at what a city going through the Industrial Revolution looked like. Lots of factories, you can see by the chimneys, okay, spewing out a lot of smoke and pollution when they're producing certain products made of iron or anything like that. And these are these terraced houses. Okay, this one here is actually in Manchester. This one here is talking about Manchester United in terms of football community. That's where football, because football was a poor man's sport in England back then, really developed in places like Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, places around those areas, because those people would they'd work all day, and the one day that they had off, 2 days they had off was Saturday and Sunday, and they'd watch their football that day. That's why it became such a cult thing. A couple more images here for you. You can see it's very densely populated areas because people wanted to live close to their factory so they could walk to their work and save money. Now, suburbanization. Now, what suburbanization means is the movement away from everyone having to be very, very close to the city. This usually came with the development of transport and the development of different types of professions that didn't need to be in the factories. So, suburbanized areas, okay, or suburban housing. The suburbs, okay, so houses were bigger. They might have had a backyard and a front yard, backyard or a front yard, or both. And this was usually really fueled by development of different transport and also privatized transport, so people using their own cars. And you can see here, this is sort of suburbanized living. Again, still pretty densely populated, but you can see there's a bit of a backyard for most people. And this is sort of the town that I lived in the UK, in Reading. A lot of it look like this. So they've got their backyard, but very much lots of own private cars, and then they get into work by using the public roads. Mid to late 1900s, so now we're starting in the 1950s, 60s. What you see here is a city starting to spread outwards. The reason why a city starts to spread outwards is because in the inner city, okay, rent starts to become very, very high. Factories which take up a lot of space or different industrial plants can't pay the rent, so they move out. They go to places where the rent is cheaper, okay, and then these areas start to decay away, okay, they become derelict, okay, and they start to be, the city becomes a little bit depressed in that way, in the sense that there's not a lot of people taking up those empty spaces because of the high rent or because of the state of the factory or the building as it was. I'll show you that down as I come down here. And also, sorry, apologies, the development of terraced housing going out and apartment blocks or tenement houses coming in, which I'll show you very soon. You can see this is here is kind of like a rundown in a city area. An old factory, again, rundown, abandoned in inner cities. We'll talk more about the creation of these problems later on. Ms. Tomlinson will be taking you for that lesson. Again, rundown in inner city areas. Places like Detroit in the USA really experience this. These are those terraced houses that I talked about. Because the factories aren't there anymore, a lot of people didn't actually live in those areas, and some became abandoned and again derelict. There you go, same thing. Not the most charming neighbourhood. And then, like I mentioned, the tenement houses, so state built, state owned apartment blocks to house people who still need to be close to the city but couldn't afford their own place. Again, not the most attractive places, and sometimes could be, if not managed well, could be sort of hot points for crime and issues in the neighbourhood. Another one there, another good example. 1980s and 90s onwards, okay, what we saw is a process called a counter-urbanisation, the movement away from people living in cities and going out towards different satellite towns, different areas around the place, okay? So you also could see reinvestment within that city, okay, or in other areas to sort of fuel the economic rejuvenation of that city in different ways. And you can see here, this is these images show that quite well. So a modern building built around an old factory, an old shell. Okay, and if they invest enough money in that factory, it can still look quite nice, the outer shell. It's not actually going to be a factory. It might be accommodation, or it might be an art gallery, or it might be some apartment blocks or something like that, or business spaces, which I'll show you soon. And again, you can see here this sort of investing more money in the city or those areas that were derelict to make sure that it's looking attractive again. I like this image. I like this image a lot because it's got an old factory that's now apartment blocks or business spaces, new buildings around it with that reinvestment of money, but then also green space, which might have been an old factory site as well, showing that you can have the old and new in cities these days. A couple of images as well that I wanted to show you is, like I've been talking about a bit, it's really quite popular now to live in old regenerated buildings because they can create quite cool spaces. Like this is, I just searched up loft apartment, and I mean that's sick, that's awesome. Obviously very in a lot of places very sought after, and now starting to become very rich, but in a lot of very high in rent, but in a lot of places you can still find these spaces being rejuvenated. And then the sort of the opposite to that, instead of filling these spaces, cities are still very much densely populated, but because the rent is so high, what we're seeing is these massive tall apartment blocks and quite skinny apartment blocks as well, because this land is so expensive that the smaller the smaller their plot of land and then they build up, the better. So what we've seen there is, and I've got some notes down for you, some just to really get down what I have said to you and really solidify what I've said to you. I want you to get these notes down before we move on. Just notes pretty much on what I talked about then. Okay, I know I've sort of bounced around a little bit, but in general, okay, you can see here sort of the process on what cities have done. From here, I'm going to give you some activities to do something from the textbook, and then on Monday, Ms. Tomlinson's going to take you for the lesson. She's going to have a screencast for you about the problems created by this whole process, and then how people have solved it. Go on, you boys. Thanks a lot. Just look out for my post for the instructions on the tasks.